My name is Dr. Meredith Calloway. I'm an emergency room physician, 11 years in medicine, 8 of those in the ER. I've coded patients in parking lots, intubated teenagers who made one bad decision on a Friday night, and held the hands of strangers in their final minutes when no family had shown up yet. I never did this for recognition. I did it because somewhere between my first clinical rotation and my 100th overnight shift, I stopped being able to imagine doing anything else. But nothing in those 11 years prepared me for what my brother said to me at the Whitmore Foundation Gala. The gala was held at the Hargrove Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago. The kind of place where the chandeliers cost more than most people's mortgages and the waitstaff move like they've been rehearsing since birth. Black tie, open bar, donor tables at $10,000 a seat. It was a charity event for pediatric cardiac research. My hospital was one of the major sponsors, and I'd been asked personally by our chief of medicine to attend and represent the department. I hadn't planned on seeing my family there. I spotted them near the East Wing bar, my mother in her signature navy gown, my sister-in-law perfectly pressed beside her, and my brother, older than me by 6 years, an investment banker at a firm on LaSalle Street. The kind of man who wore success like a second skin and expected everyone around him to acknowledge it. He turned when he heard my heels on the marble. His eyes swept over me once, top to bottom, the way they always had, like he was cataloging everything I wasn't. "You actually came," he said. Not warmly. More like a man noticing a smudge on an otherwise clean window. I smiled. I said hello to my mother, who squeezed my arm and immediately turned to tell my sister-in-law something about the floral arrangements. I said hello to my sister-in-law, who was polite in that particular way that means nothing. And then my brother leaned in, voice low but not quiet enough. "You know, half these people donated the kind of money you'll never see in a lifetime of playing doctor in an ER. Playing doctor. I've been spit on by a patient having a psychotic break. I've stood in a trauma bay for 6 hours straight without sitting down. I've delivered a baby in an elevator because the maternity ward was 3 floors up and there wasn't time. And my brother, with his scotch and his cufflinks, said playing doctor with a smile that told me he'd been waiting years to find exactly the right moment to say it. I didn't respond. I've learned the hard way that words fired back at my brother in public only make me the one who looks hysterical. I turned, put my glass of water on a passing tray, and looked across the room instead. That's when I saw her. She was sitting at a table near the far window, alone in the way that isn't peaceful. Her chair was slightly apart from the round table beside her, not by much, but enough. She was maybe 19, 20 at most. Her dress was too formal for someone that age, the kind of thing chosen by someone else. Her right arm was in a compression sleeve, and on the table in front of her sat a medical alert card and an untouched plate of food. Her face was turned toward the window, but her eyes weren't focused on anything outside. They were focused on nothing. The look of someone who had been in too many rooms where they didn't feel like they belonged. I knew that look. I'd seen it in the mirror during my intern year, when I was so hollowed out by exhaustion and self-doubt that I genuinely wasn't sure if I was still a person or just a function. I also recognized her. I'd seen her name on a chart 8 months earlier. Olivia Strand, 19 years old, congenital heart condition, third surgery in 4 years. She'd coded in my ER at 2 a.m. on a February night, and I'd brought her back. She was the daughter of Dr. Harmon Wilder, the chief of pediatric cardiology at Northwestern Memorial. The man who had, according to my chief, personally pushed for this gala to fund the research that might spare the next generation of kids like his daughter from going through what she'd gone through. She was sitting alone at her own father's event. I crossed the room without thinking. I wasn't performing anything. I wasn't making a statement. I just walked over and sat down next to her, not across, next to, the way you sit beside someone when you're not there to evaluate them. She startled slightly, then recognized me. Her eyes shifted, not quite relief, but close. "Dr. Mumpany." "Calloway," she said. "You don't have to call me that tonight," I told her. "You look like you could use some company." She almost laughed. "I look that bad. You look like someone put you in a dress and told you to be grateful." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yeah, pretty much." We sat there for a while. I didn't try to fill the silence with cheerful noise. I just stayed. We talked about small things, The food, the chandelier that looked like it was about to make a structural decision, a man near the bar who kept laughing too loudly. She loosened, just a little, enough to eat something, enough to shift her chair back toward the table. I don't know exactly when her father noticed us, but I felt the room change before I heard the footsteps. Dr. Harmon Wilder was not a small presence. Silver-haired, decorated in the way that academic medicine rewards its most accomplished, the kind of man who commanded attention without asking for it. He stopped beside our table. He looked at his daughter. She was laughing, softly, at something I'd said about a patient who'd once tried to bribe me with a half-eaten granola bar. He looked at me, and then he said, quietly but with the full weight of a man who knew exactly what he was saying, "You brought her back. And then you brought her back again." The table went still. Someone nearby stopped mid-sentence. I didn't know what to say. He reached out, not for a handshake, but placed his hand briefly over mine the way a parent does when they are beyond formality, beyond titles, when what they feel doesn't have a professional category. "This hospital is lucky to have you," he said. "The whole field is." I looked at his daughter. She was watching her father with something shifting in her expression. A daughter watching her father see someone she already knew was worth seeing. I simply said she did the hard part, both times. Behind me, across the room, I could feel my brother watching. The ride home was in my brother's car. It hadn't been planned. My mother had accepted a ride with him before I could politely redirect, and somehow I'd been folded into the arrangement. My brother drove. My mother sat in the passenger seat. I sat behind her, looking out the window at the city blurring past. It took 4 blocks. "Well," my mother said, adjusting the clasp on her bracelet. "That was a bit much, don't you think?" I kept my eyes on the window. "You couldn't just attend like a normal person," she continued. "You had to make yourself the center of attention." My brother's hands stayed on the wheel, but I could see his expression in the rearview mirror. Satisfied in a way that he didn't need to say out loud. "Dr. Wilder was just being gracious," my mother went on. "You embarrassed yourself by letting it go on that long. People were staring." I thought about the girl at the table, the untouched plate, the medical alert card. 8 months ago, I'd had my hands on her chest at 2 a.m. while her heart had decided, temporarily, that it was done. I thought about how long it must have taken her to get dressed that evening, to agree to come to this event, to sit in that room full of people who were all there, theoretically, because of her. And she'd been sitting alone. My brother finally spoke. "You know what Harmon Wilder's going to think tomorrow? He's going to think you were working him. Every ambitious doctor knows who he is. You sat with his kids so he'd notice you." I turned from the window and looked at my brother's reflection. "I sat with her," I said, "because she was alone." He scoffed. "You've always had the gift for making your ambition look like charity." My mother murmured something that wasn't agreement or disagreement. The noise she made when she wanted the conversation to stop, but wasn't willing to stop it herself. I turned back to the window. My brother was still talking. Clipped, certain. He had the kind of voice that expected the room to confirm everything it said. "I spoke to someone at the hospital last month," he said. "Administrator level. Word is your department's been flagged for over-resource allocation. Someone said you push back on discharge timelines, that you're going to cause problems for the hospital's partnership with the insurance network." My stomach tightened, not because I was afraid of him, but because I recognized the game. This wasn't tonight. This had been building. "You don't handle the business side of medicine," he said. "You never have. You're good in the room. I'll give you that. But you don't understand what sustains the institution. And someday, that's going to catch up with you." I didn't answer. I stared at the reflection of the city on the glass, and I thought about a night. About 3 years ago. It was a Tuesday early spring, 11 p.m. A woman had come in, mid-40s, complaining of chest tightness and shoulder pain. She had a history of anxiety, a note in her chart from a previous visit citing panic attacks. The nurse on intake had flagged her as likely non-cardiac. She wasn't in the system for any cardiac risk markers. No smoking, low cholesterol, non-diabetic. I went in anyway. Something in the way she described the shoulder pain, radiating, she said, like a weight being pressed from the inside. I ordered the EKG before she'd finished the sentence. STEMI, left anterior descending artery, one of the most dangerous heart attacks a person can have, in a patient who looked on paper like a textbook anxiety presentation. We got her to the cath lab inside 12 minutes of her arrival. The cardiologist on call told that another 45 minutes and she wouldn't have made it. Her name was Susan. She had two daughters. She'd been on her way home from her older daughter's college orientation. I wrote her name in my phone's notes app that night, the way I keep a private list, not of cases, but of people. Names that mean something happened and it mattered. I thought about Susan in the back of my brother's car. I thought about all the times I'd overridden a premature judgment. All the times the paperwork said one thing and the patient in front of me said another. I thought about what it would have cost to be the kind of physician my brother would have respected, efficient, politically careful, a team player in the institutional sense of the phrase. Susan wouldn't be here. I said nothing for the rest of the ride. Neither did my mother. My brother drove with the radio off, which was how he always communicated that he had said the final word on something. When the car stopped at my building, I got out, said good night, and didn't wait for a response. I stood in my apartment for a long time without turning on the lights. Then I sat at my kitchen table, pulled out my phone, and looked at the note with all the names. Susan was in there. A 31-year-old named Dominic who'd arrived unresponsive after a cycling accident on the lakefront. A 12-year-old girl whose parents had brought her in for what they thought was food poisoning. A grandmother named Rose who tried to tell me through a language barrier that something felt wrong and I'd found the clot that would have killed her within hours. And Olivia Strand, 19. February 4th, 2017 a.m. I closed the phone. I went to bed. I didn't sleep well, but not for the reasons my brother would have assumed. The next morning, two things happened. The first was a text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Olivia. My dad gave me your contact info. Hope that's okay. I just wanted to say thank you for last night. I felt like an exhibit for most of the evening. You made me feel like a person. Oh! I sat with that message for a few minutes. Then I replied, you are a person. A pretty funny one, actually. Take care of yourself. The second thing was a voicemail from my chief of medicine, Dr. Park. He sounded measured, which was how he always sounded, but also careful. He said, Meredith, just giving you a heads up. We've had some internal flags come through on a few of your recent cases. Resource authorization, specifically, nothing formal yet. But you might want to loop in the department administrator before the week is out. Call me when you can. I stood in my kitchen holding my phone, and I thought about my brother's voice in the car. I spoke to someone at the hospital last month. Administrator level. I called my chief back within the hour. He walked me through it carefully. 3 cases flagged, all of them involving extended workup times that had exceeded what the insurance network considered protocol standard. All 3 cases, when I pulled up my memory of them, were patients I'd kept longer because I hadn't been satisfied with the initial picture. In 2 of those cases, extended time had directly led to a diagnosis that would have been missed. The third was the STEMI woman, Susan. These flags didn't come from clinical review, I told Dr. Park. He paused. No, he said, they didn't. They came from administrative channels. Another pause. I'm not going to confirm a source I don't have documentation for, he said, but I will tell you that Dr. Wilder called me this morning, unprompted. He asked specifically about your position here and about your clinical record. I sat down slowly. He said he's been aware of you professionally for some time, Dr. Park continued. He said last night confirmed something for him. He wants to talk to you about a joint clinical initiative, ER to cardiology continuity protocols. He specifically requested you as the ER lead. I didn't say anything for a moment. He also said, Dr. Park added quietly, that the woman you saved in February is his daughter. I knew. I hadn't said anything. I hadn't leveraged it. I'd just done my job. The administrative flags, I said. I'll be looking into where they originated, Dr. Park said. I'd encourage you to document your clinical rationale on those 3 cases thoroughly. But Meredith, your record speaks for itself. I want you to know that. I thanked him and ended the call. I knew what I needed to do. Not for revenge, not to make a scene, but because silence, when something is wrong, has its own kind of cost, and I'd paid it for too long already. I spent the next 4 days doing what I do in the ER, methodical, thorough, one layer at a time. I pulled my documentation on the flagged cases. I cross-referenced the insurance denial codes with the clinical outcomes. I made notes quietly, without telling anyone what I was building. I also made a phone call to a colleague who worked in hospital compliance, someone I'd known since residency, someone who understood the architecture of how pressure moves through institutions. I asked her a simple question: if a non-hospital party initiated an administrative review through a contact at the insurance network, would that leave a traceable trail? She said, usually, yes. It took less than a week. My brother had a college roommate who was now a senior account manager at the insurance network that held a hospital's largest coverage contract. They'd stayed close. 3 weeks ago, that man had forwarded an internally sourced memo, one that summarized concerns about resource allocation, to someone in the hospital's administrative wing. The memo had not been generated by any clinical review. It had been generated by my brother, based on things I can only assume he'd gathered from our mother, who talks, and from whatever second-hand hospital gossip he'd cultivated through his network. It wasn't sophisticated, it was just connected. The way his world worked. Doors that opened not because of merit but because of proximity. I filed a formal ethics complaint with the hospital's compliance office on a Monday morning. No drama, no announcement. Just an email with a subject line that said, regarding potential external interference in clinical review process, and 17 pages of attached documentation. By the following Thursday, the administrative flags on my cases had been retracted, pending the compliance review. The insurance contact had been flagged for conflict of interest investigation. My brother's name was not mentioned in any public-facing document. The complaint was about the process, not the person, which is how these things work when you do them right. I didn't call my brother. I didn't tell my mother. I simply returned to work. There is a satisfaction in that, quieter than most people expect. No confrontation, no righteous speech. Just the truth laid out in organized paragraphs, doing what truth does when you stop being afraid to let it. Dr. Din. Wilder and I met the following week in his office on the 14th floor. He had the kind of office that felt like it had been earned rather than decorated. Books that had been read, papers in active use, a framed drawing taped crookedly to the side of his bookshelf that I suspected was from a patient. He stood when I came in. We shook hands, and then he said, without preamble, I owe you something. I told him he didn't. I was at that gala, he said, because I raised the money, arranged the program, oversaw every detail. And my daughter was sitting alone in the corner of a room full of people who were all there, technically, for her. He paused. I didn't see her. You did. I told him she had done all the hard work, both in the ER and at the gala. He smiled. She told me you made her laugh. She said it was the first time in months she'd laughed at something that wasn't on a screen in her bedroom. We talked for 2 hours. The initiative he proposed was real, a structured protocol to improve the handoff between emergency care and cardiology follow-up for patients with cardiac histories. The gap in that transition was where outcomes got lost. I'd been thinking about it independently for over a year without having the institutional weight behind me to push it forward. He had the weight, I had the roadmap. It felt like the first time in a long time that I was working with someone who was solving the same problem I was. Before I left, he asked, how did you know to sit with her? I thought about the untouched plate, the medical alert card, the chair slightly apart. I know what it looks like, I said, when someone is working very hard not to need anything. He nodded slowly. She told me the same thing about you. I wasn't sure what to do with that. I thanked him and left. 3 weeks later, I was back at the hospital at 6 in the morning for what the protocol development team was calling a working breakfast, which meant pastries from the second-floor cafe and a whiteboard that someone had already filled with color-coded arrows. The team included 2 cardiologists, a hospitalist, a nurse practitioner from the step-down unit, and me. Olivia was there too, not as a patient advocate. Dr. Tubb. Wilder had asked her to participate in the initiative's design phase, to represent the patient perspective in a room full of clinicians who tended to model care from the inside looking out. She was in jeans and a Northwestern sweatshirt, her medical alert bracelet visible on her right wrist, and she was the first person to point out, politely but directly, that the discharge instructions in our current cardiac protocol assume the patient had consistent access to transportation and a pharmacy, which many of our patients did not. The room went a little quiet. "She's right," I said. "Obviously, she's right," said the hospitalist, who had the useful quality of being immune to awkwardness. "Let's fix it." Olivia caught my eye across the table and almost smiled. I almost smiled back. Neither of us made it into a moment. We got back to the whiteboard. I thought, sitting in that room, about the word that kept getting used in descriptions of me after the gala: hero. A reporter from the hospital's newsletter had tried to write a small piece about the initiative and used the word twice in the draft I'd been asked to review. I'd edited both instances out. I wasn't a hero. I was a physician who had seen a girl sitting alone and sat down. That's not heroism. That's just paying attention. What came after? The institutional fight, the documentation, the complaint, the initiative, the whiteboard full of arrows. That wasn't heroism either. It was just refusing to let the wrong thing be the final word. I sent my brother a single text message the week the compliance review concluded. No context, no accusation, no demand, just the flags were retracted. In case you were wondering, he didn't respond for 3 days. Then he sent back, "I heard." That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just 2 words that meant he knew it hadn't worked, and I knew it hadn't worked, and we both understood what had been attempted. I didn't need more than that. I'd stopped requiring his acknowledgement a long time ago. That's not something that happens in a day or a gala or a phone call. It happens slowly over years, each time you choose to do the right thing without waiting for him to notice, until one day you look around and realize you don't need him to notice anymore. My mother called me the following Sunday. She always calls on Sundays, and our conversations have a particular rhythm that hasn't changed since I was in medical school. She asks how I'm sleeping. I say fine. She tells me about something my brother is doing that I should admire. I make a non-committal noise. She tells me I work too hard. I agree, because I do. This time was different. She asked how I was sleeping. I said fine. Then she paused, and in a voice slightly softer than her usual register, she said, "Dr. Wilder's office sent a letter to the house, addressed to me. I don't know how he got my address." I waited. "He thanked me," she said, "for raising a physician who knows how to be present with the patient." She paused again. "He said you saved his daughter's life and then spent an evening making her feel like herself." I didn't say anything. "I didn't know," my mother said, "about the young woman at the gala. I didn't know she was his daughter or that you treated her. I thought you were—" She stopped. "You thought I was performing," I said. A long pause. Yes. I looked out the window of my apartment at the Sunday morning Chicago sky, gray in the way November goes gray, like the city is thinking something heavy. "I know," I said. She was quiet. And then, in a voice that cost her something, she said, "I'm sorry I didn't ask before I decided. It wasn't a full reckoning. It wasn't a scene from a movie where the family gathers and the truth redeems everything in an orchestrated moment. It was just my mother on a Sunday phone call, admitting that she'd assumed something about me that wasn't true. That's all I needed. Not applause, not an audience. Just one person in that family looking at me the way Dr. Wilder had looked at his daughter and deciding she hadn't been seeing clearly. The protocol launched in January. We called it the Continuity Bridge Initiative. Not the catchiest name, but accurate. It was a structured set of handoff procedures between the ER and cardiology for patients with identified cardiac histories, including a medication reconciliation step, a transportation needs assessment, and a guaranteed follow-up call within 48 hours of discharge. In the first 3 months, readmission rates in our target population dropped by 14%. That number will change as the dataset grows, but 14% of those readmissions are people who didn't have to come back because the gap had been closed. Olivia was in the room when we reviewed the first quarterly data. She'd joined the patient advisory board formally by then. She deferred her spring semester at Northwestern to do it, which her father accepted with the particular expression of a man trying not to let his pride become pressure. When the 14% appeared on the slide, she didn't clap. She just nodded like someone who already knew the answer and had been waiting for the room to catch up. I know that feeling. I was almost out the door after the meeting when she caught up with me in the hallway. She fell into step beside me the way she had at the gala table, shoulder to shoulder rather than face to face. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." That night, at the gala, did you know who I was when you sat down? I thought about it honestly. "Yes," I said. "I recognized you from your chart. But that's not why you came over." "No," I said. "That's not why." She nodded. We walked a few more steps in silence. I spent a lot of years feeling like the reason people paid attention to me was the thing wrong with my heart, she said. Like I was a case study that had learned to talk. I stopped walking. She stopped too. "You're not," I said. She smiled. "The real one, not the polite one I'd first seen at the table." "I know that now. It took me a while." I told her, "Take the while." I told her, "Take the while. Take all of it." The knowing matters more than the speed. She went back toward the conference room. I watched her walk down the hall, steady, certain, the compression sleeve visible at her wrist like a detail she'd long since stopped hiding. I thought about something Dr. Den Wilder had said in our first meeting about the gap in cardiac care, about the space between the ER and the next point of contact where patients got lost. I thought about all the gaps like that, between the moment someone is seen and the moment they're treated like what they actually are, between the version of you that people assume and the version you've been quietly building all along. Closing those gaps. That's the work. Not the gala, not the awards, not the moment some authority figure says the right thing in front of the right people. The work is the gap. It's sitting down beside someone in an uncomfortable dress who's been turned into a symbol of someone else's generosity and just staying. Being there long enough for them to eat something, long enough to laugh about the chandelier. My brother and I haven't had a real conversation since the gala. He's still in his office on LaSalle Street. The compliance review concluded without a formal penalty against him. He was never named directly, and the investigation stopped at the administrative contact. He knew that going in. He'd structured it to stay at arm's length. But he also knows what I know. And I think, if I'm honest, that's enough. I don't need him to become a different person. I spent too many years waiting for that particular outcome, and it only made me smaller. What I needed was to stop shrinking to fit a version of me he could tolerate. I stopped doing that somewhere between the gala and the hospital hallway and a 14% drop on a quarterly slide. Not all at once. Gradually, the way you only notice the threshold after you've already crossed it. I kept the text from Olivia. "You made me feel like a person." I keep it the same way I keep all the names in my notes app. Not as trophies, not as proof of something, but as reminders that the point of paying attention is what happens after. That the moment you see someone is only the beginning, the rest is showing up, doing the work. Refusing to let the wrong thing be the final word. That's the job. That's always been the job, and I've never once regretted doing it. I used to think the hardest part of my job was the clinical side, the decisions made in seconds, the diagnoses that lived or died on a single detail you either noticed or didn't. I was wrong. The hardest part was doing all of that, doing it right, doing it consistently, year after year, and still walking into a room full of people who saw only what my brother wanted them to see. That's the thing about being dismissed by someone who knows you well enough to make it hurt. They don't need to lie. They just have to frame the truth a certain way, and suddenly everything you've built looks like overreach, or luck, or a performance. My brother called it playing doctor. He said it in a room full of people who give money to hospitals, and he said it like it was just a small observation. Casual. Almost kind. That's how the most damaging things get said. Not with venom, but with a shrug. What I've learned, slowly and not always gracefully, is that the actions we take when no one important is watching are the ones that actually define us. I didn't cross that ballroom because Dr. Wilder was standing nearby. I crossed it because Olivia was alone and I recognized what that looked like from the inside. That's not virtue, that's just paying attention. And paying attention consistently over time is what eventually makes the truth impossible to bury. Olivia's father didn't thank me because I'd been strategic. He thanked me because I'd been present, twice. Once in an ER at 2 in the morning and once in a hotel ballroom where I had absolutely nothing to gain. Those two moments were connected by nothing except the habit of showing up for the person in front of you. That's the only thing I know for certain about how this works. You can't manufacture the moment when someone with authority finally sees you clearly. You can't engineer your own recognition. What you can do is keep doing the work with enough integrity that when the moment comes, there's something real for it to land on. My brother's interference in my hospital review wasn't surprising to me. What surprised me was how cleanly it unraveled once I stopped being afraid to document the truth. He'd built his whole approach on the assumption that I would stay quiet, that I'd absorb the pressure and adjust, the way I always had. What he miscalculated was that I'd spent 11 years in emergency medicine, and in that field, the moment you stop responding to what's actually happening in front of you is the moment someone gets hurt. I trained myself out of passivity, he just hadn't noticed. The 14% drop in readmissions in the first quarter of the Continuity Bridge initiative is not my achievement alone. It belongs to the hospitalist who said, obviously she's right, let's fix it, without needing a meeting about it. It belongs to Olivia, who walked into a room full of doctors and told us our discharge instructions assumed resources that our patients didn't have. It belongs to every person who showed up to that early morning meeting with bad coffee and a genuine willingness to close a gap that had been costing people. That's what I want to carry forward. Not the gala moment, not the institutional vindication, but the understanding that the work of becoming, of building something real from your choices, is quiet, cumulative, and entirely within your control. My brother couldn't take it from me. No one could, because it wasn't in the places he knew how to reach. Wherever you are in this, whatever room you've been made to feel small in, I hope you know that the version of you they can't see is still the version that matters most. Keep building it. The truth has a way of outlasting the people trying to muffle it.